Hello and welcome to this episode of Pause with Nandini on NRI Affairs. I'm joining from Mianjin, Brisbane, the unceded land of the Yagera and Turrbal people. It was and always will be stolen land, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. With me today is Rajeev Balasubramanyam, a guest who's as likely to inspire and ignite debate on Instagram as he is to earn literary acclaim. Rajiv, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
A little bit more about him. He's a British novelist born to parents from Bangalore, both Fulbright scholars, grew up in England and the United States. And I suppose the split in cultures informs a lot of the wide sort of range of experiences that he can bring to the writing that he does. He's a graduate of Oxford and Cambridge, not overachieving at all by any means, with a PhD in English from Lancaster University, lived in London, Kathmandu, Berlin, Manchester, Hong Kong, where he was a research scholar at the University of Hong Kong. His debut in Beautiful Disguises won a Betty Trask Prize before publication, drawing praise from The Guardian as colorful, spirited, and crackling with charm, and from Nadeem Aslam as brilliant. The prize-winning short story that inspired his second novel, The Dreamer, in 2010, became a dream logic portrait of a British Asian actor's breakdown, and it was called Haunting by India Today. He later experimented with serialized fiction in Starstruck. Professor Chandra Follows His Bliss, I love the name, firstly, was in 2019. It cemented his reputation, published in the UK and the US, translated into 6 languages, and named Booksellers Book of the Month. It was hailed by Marian Keyes as tender and compassionate and so funny. We see a little bit of that humor on Instagram as well, where he's taken to writing these posts, not really writing, but doing like little video snippets of topics that range across race, culture, social justice, and of course, what's paramount in all our minds right now, Gaza and Israel and the genocide that is ongoing as we speak. It almost feels a little strange, to be honest, to be speaking of anything but Gaza at this point. We're in August of 2025, where there is a mass starvation that has been inflicted upon the Palestinian people. And while there has been a lot of awareness and a lot of talk, it all seems it doesn't seem sufficient, and it seems like perhaps the right people are not still talking about it with the full breadth that they should be. But nonetheless, as Rajiv often speaks on his Instagram, that there is a lot of interconnectedness in everything that we see in the world. And we're hoping to talk a little bit about how the dots connect in today's conversation. I'll begin with a little bit of background. You've spoken about a period, Rajiv, where you focused more on a spiritual pursuit and a spiritual life. And now, of course, you engage deeply with social and political life. Could you share a little bit of your background and journey in that context?
Well, actually, before the period where I engaged almost solely with spiritual life was the period where I engaged almost solely with politics and literature. And then I had a breakdown age 32. And I think part of it was not having any real interest in myself. It was this sort of martyred narcissism, I think you could call it, or wounded narcissism, where you don't see yourself as having much value, so you're only trying to change the world. I mean, behind that are probably dreams of success and fame inside of it all. It's a very dark position to be in. It's a position a lot of activists are in, actually. So I was in that for my 20s, really. It was a very dark time in my life. And then 32, I did my first Vipassana meditation course, kind of because I tried everything else. I felt I just tried pretty much everything life had to offer. You know, success, falling in love, meeting famous people, sex, drugs, alcohol in extreme artistic endeavors, going all over the world. I did a lot. Nothing worked. I was just still miserable. And I did a 10-day Vipassana meditation course. Oh, I always do something quite extreme. And, it's a 10 hours meditation a day. You don't make eye contact. I've done many, many, many of them now. But that was my first one. And I think about a week later, I started crying, couldn't stop crying, couldn't stop crying, still couldn't stop crying. I kept saying this sort of one core truth that I've been running from for a very long time, certainly for my entire adult life, which is I don't like myself. And that was the foundation of everything. And then the next, 18 to 20 years were about learning to like or love myself, and were about the internal healing. And I didn't have much to give to the outside world. I did my best, but I certainly don't think that such a wounded person is not in a position to wander around trying to change the world. It doesn't work like that. I think you have to heal yourself before you try anything like that. But then I reached a point, and it wasn't long after becoming a father, and I was ready to become a father. I'd done as much healing work. Obviously you can't. You won't have children till you're like 145 if you try to heal every aspect of you. So I felt, okay, I'm in a position now where I know I could be a good father. I just know it inside of myself. A little old. I was, late 40s. And then maybe a year after that, I I watched Trump's inauguration, every billionaire in America on the front row, and Elon Musk doing that, whatever the hell that salute was. And then I thought, okay, enough being apolitical. It's time to re-engage. And that it's a funny thing, because you're trying to, your compassion is coming out. You're trying to do something for other people as well as yourself. You're trying to, become a part of the we instead of just the I, or just the little family. So those are all good things, but you also, and this is again the reason why I think activists are so vulnerable, and have to be careful, because you're exposing yourself to all kinds of things that honestly it's probably better in some respects not to expose yourself to. Your life is much more pleasant without thinking about Hindutva, or Gaza, or reading accounts of what happened in Gujarat in 2002. This is like really traumatizing stuff. But I guess I felt that I could do it now. I could do it without messing myself up or harming myself, and that turned out to be the case. So that's where the re-engagement came from. And I feel more like a whole person, I feel
Yeah.
like I'm filling the different roles that I need to fulfill. And I think maybe this is a Western world thing, but maybe not actually. But no, I think it probably is a Western world thing, that spirituality, modern contemporary spirituality, can become a very self-regarding, narcissistic, navel-gazing activity.
Mm,
And I didn't want to get stuck in that. And I meet a lot of people who are like that, who
yeah.
almost deny the existence of politics and see it as so worldly that it's a pollutant. And I don't think that's true. We're all on this arc together, and our material conditions matter too. Let's not
Yeah.
neglect one or the other, is my position.
Of course, and gosh, just in that, there is so much that we could possibly have an episode just on what you've said so far. But I will come back to touch on some of those things in a bit. But I did want to speak a little bit about this sort of duality and the struggle that you sort of refer to, being in the world and not being of it, and all of those things. Many of us feel the tension in participating in capitalism, for instance, right? And using iPhones and Meta and online shopping, and also wanting a more equitable, more sustainable world. And is the answer in I would imagine you have a nuanced take on this, but I'd still like to ask you that, do you think, and I see a lot of online communities now sprouting, obviously a reflection of offline communities, of people wanting to go off grid, disconnect, pulling out of the system, forming their little collectives. And then there are people in the activism space who hold on to this idea of bringing in change from within and infiltrating systems of power and dismantling systemic racism, for instance, from within and all of that? Or do you see a combination or a middle path in basically engaging with the world while you also partake and are sort of complicit in some ways in perpetuating some of these systems?
Well, I would just reduce it to this: you got to make a living. And I don't know how to make a living without being at least in part embedded within capitalism. I just can't see another way of doing it. And I have a family. So, and how else do I, if I use some tiny platform instead of Instagram, I'll reach far fewer people.
Sure.
If I don't publish my books with a mainstream publisher again, I'll reach far fewer people. It may be an ideologically purer position, but that seems to be the best way to go about it in terms of numbers. But also I have to make money somehow. So and that question can't be evaded unless you have some sort of private fortune. So that will be my take on it, for me personally.
Sure. Um, when we engage with the world, we sort of sometimes at least operate from hope that interventions, the right interventions, can shift consciousness, can shift the way we think about community, think about the world. Now, when I think about the context of Hindutva, which you speak a lot about, which is to the progressive voices, it's seen as ethno-nationalistic, it's supremacist, it's exclusionary, and it's dangerous. It's dangerous ideology to minorities, and to some extent to the proponents themselves. So that's a reach that they perhaps don't see as yet. But of course, to the people who follow Hindutva and who speak for it, they see it as Hindu pride, as regaining some sort of mythical lost power. And they see it as an equation to perhaps nationalist ideas as well. What is a conversation then in that space? Because just as I can't see myself turning suddenly overnight into Hindutva proponent, I can't imagine, even though I engage in enough and more dialogue, I cannot imagine a sudden shift happening towards the other side as well. What do you find then useful? What could genuinely move the conversation forward?
In terms of changing people's minds, that's where what we're talking about, right? Well, this is very, very difficult when someone's wedded to a fascist ideology. But I think the first thing is you can't engage with them about on their level about what they're saying and say you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. It just doesn't. They just get more and more militant
Mm.
about it. The thing to look for, I think, is the woundedness inside of them, and particularly with young men, which is it seems to be what I'm good at, is engaging with young men. And perhaps I could just relate to that woundedness more. And when I can see that woundedness, then you can see what the fascism is doing. They're trying to fix themselves and it's not working. The wound is not changing at all, or it's getting worse. So if you can somehow maneuver around all of the stuff that comes out of their mouths, this sort of limitless waves of nonsense and all of this rage and all this hatred and get to the fear. First of all, behind the rage and the hatred is tremendous fear and self-hatred and self-dislike. It's always there. Is usually a father wound, but it could be a mother wound as well. And if you could somehow circle around it and around it and around it and get to that, that's when you have a possibility. You got to kind of engage with them on a human level. That's what I think. Kind of recognize that you're not their terrifying father in disguise. You're a person who actually likes them. If they can feel a bit more liked and a bit more respected and a bit more listened to, and then you can start to move from that point and maybe divert their attention somewhere else, something more wholesome, and then try to get them to realize that actually this is just making you more and more and more unhappy. But maybe if you go in this direction, this could make you happier. That's the only way that I can see it changing. Debate, it's not going to work. Facts won't work. They got their own facts, right? They
Oh,
just produce any number of alternative facts. Telling them they're wrong, putting them down, belittling them, none of that will work. Just make them more and more militant.
you've spoken
It's a
about
psychological problem. It's not a
I
political
I
problem.
know. And I suppose in some ways it's also like the family unit. And you've spoken about how fascist families sort of are replicated in the fascist state. And you've spoken about the incel culture and what that does and what that is a product of. So what you're saying kind of relates a little bit to that, but it also relates a little bit to ideas of masculinity by themselves in our age. And I feel like there isn't enough engagement with that, especially from men who could be speaking to almost their younger selves because they've sort of experienced some of these things, and out of that lived experience somehow found the way out. Like you said, like it's almost like this bird trapped in a room and cannot find a way out, and you're dashing against the walls. And once you find that way out, you can perhaps show that way to other young men. What is the role, do you think, of this sort of change in the definition and the paradigm around masculinity that feeds
Yeah,
into?
it's a huge problem because most men are either, young men are either seeing an example of authoritarian, angry masculinity and seeing that as a good thing to emulate, or they're hearing this discourse on toxic masculinity. And so they're hearing men are bad, and then that just lowers their self-esteem and pushes them into a negative place as well. It's like they can't escape that toxic masculinity narrative. Either they're hearing you're bad, or you need to be like your father, who is angry and authoritarian, but that's the way to be. And so somehow men have got to realize that being a man is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. That masculinity is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. That's one way of approaching it. The other way is to just remove the whole masculine, feminine from the agenda and
So,
just look at qualities that we want to embody as people. That may actually be better. I'm not sure how much mileage there is in redefining masculinity, because then you start to try to weave out the masculine traits and the feminine traits, which is very difficult to do because, I try to think of good masculine traits and you think, well, patience, love, calm, but I also think nurturing, compassion, but are those not feminine traits as well? It's a very difficult situation. But I think the problem for a lot of young men is just they're just not seeing the kind of men who embody a non-aggressive, non-angry, non-wounded masculinity. They're just not seeing it. Probably because most men are so messed up. Well, most women are too, really. But in
you're
a
messed
patriarchal
up enough.
society, I
Yes.
guess that that wounded masculinity is much more apparent.
You know, one of the things that you're saying about masculinity, it's almost like, what is the role modeling of success? And success and men and being able to define themselves by something external to their selves, where we say, you're enough, but well, not you're not enough because you need to do this and you need to achieve that. And what does that achievement look like? And what are the goals? And what is the sort of, they say that now the leaders you see are almost caricatures of what a not successful person's version of a successful person is. It's almost like cartoonish if you look at all our leaders and that.
Or a wounded child's twisted version of what a man is, right?
Right. And I suppose, like, and I expected this conversation to be more like a spiral than actually going through topics one by one, because I think we keep coming back to the heart of the problem, which is, how do we know ourselves and how do we accept and love ourselves, right? And that's sort of a starting point. And while there is, obviously a new age engagement with these, perhaps those two tend to be more on a superficial spiritual shopping kind of space where people are jumping from one thing to another to again try and just feel good. Let me feel good somehow this weekend. Let me do a little spiritual retreat in Thailand this weekend, and that's going to sort me out. And then I'll go party with my friends on the beach, and that'll be amazing. But it's not really, again, addressing who you are. So I think you did the hard work with your Vipassana, and you did the hard work with allowing a breakdown to again sort of rediscover who you could be. And I don't know if we have enough guidance and enough safety for men to do that in spaces. Beyond like commercial transactions where you go into retreat, pay a lot of money, and you're told that you're now healed and you can go back and you can integrate.
The thing is that that first of all, you have to recognize that healing is actually a desirable thing and that you need to heal, right? That's the first step. And a lot of people are not getting there because the first thing that they're told as men, but with women, there's a similar dynamic, but as men, is that they need to make as much money as possible. And I think that that's the kind of psychopathic root of the whole thing, that the external success, the validation of the world, fame, money, celebrity, that these things will take away that wound. And I think the problem there is that being wounded and being vulnerable is seen as feminine, and addressing your problems through achievement and through money is seen as masculine. And it's that that needs to be broken down before that wounded masculine can be healed. That men need to recognize that they have just as many emotional needs as anyone else, and that that's the first thing they need to do before. Obviously, you have survival needs, but as long as you can just about meet your survival needs, the first thing that needs to be done is to address that deep wound inside of yourself and to be honest about your feelings and emotionally as vulnerable as you need to be within whatever space it's safe for you to do that. To be able to cry, actually, I think is the most important thing for men, because not crying is it's a sort of human right to cry, and men have been told they're not allowed to cry, and
Mm.
that's so damaging. So I think that's probably one of the first steps is to just, I cried all the time at the beginning. I still cry quite often. Yeah, it's a hobby, and and it's completely essential. It's almost like denying your humanity. If you're not allowing yourself to cry, then you're not allowing yourself to be human, and then you're going to do the same to other people. So yeah, to me, that is the kind of root of it.
Let me ask you then, I mean, we're speaking about the masculine. Where do you see then relationships or having a partner, or, now even relationships are being redefined in so many ways, right? There's situationship and there's, all sorts of polydynamics. And then there is, of course, the golden ideal of this one person who's your friend, lover, guide, whatever through life. Where do you see that as a role in this sort of almost settling of the masculine?
I think in couples and relationships, you tend to sort of outsource part of life to the other person. There's a part that is your strength and a part that's their strength. Maybe one of you is much more sociable than the other, or one of you is better at doing laundry. You kind of, you kind of do that, but you can't outsource your emotional needs to somebody else,
Mm.
because then you might be the one who's making the money, but then you're emotionally you're the child and they're the mother, and that's a sort of messed up relationship, especially when you're parents. So the masculine part of what men have to do is that they have to be able to stand up by themselves, unsupported emotionally, and that requires self-love. Oh yes, you need to be mothered and cuddled and comforted sometimes when you're upset. Both of you do, but you also need to be able to stand up as an independent, emotionally secure adult.
Mm.
And I believe that most men can't do that, and they outsource it, so they end up marrying people who are their mothers. And I don't think that's and women can do the same, of course. They can marry people because they want a father. Uh, and I think that's very, very damaging, especially for their children. So yeah, that's another reason why we have to do that emotional work first, so that you can stand up emotionally, but people think that you need to stand up financially, and that's about it. And yeah, that's not the
That's
case.
interesting. It's basically looking at success, as we were saying, through a different lens and what is success and defining it differently. So that's a different conversation. But I did want to touch upon what you've also spoken about and the links between Hindutva and Zionism, right? And the points of similarity and the points of departure. And some of those same themes kind of tend to play out across both. And also you've touched upon an interesting, it would be humorous if it wasn't tragic, about how you see a lot of this idolatry for the Israeli military prowess from the Indian keyboard sort of warriors, and then they get knocked down and disrespected and disregarded by the Israeli force. So there is this strange dynamic of hero worship there. What do you make of it? What do you make of this whole dynamic? And How do you see it actually being something that's quite dangerous?
The sort of Hindutva worship of Israel. I mean, it's something that I've only come across recently. I wasn't even aware of it. I started reading about it, and well, it's this worship of the armored state. You know, the state as this kind of for, armed fortress, the most militarized patriarchal state in the world. Everybody does military service. I've spent quite a lot of time in Israel actually as a young man. I worked on a kibbutz and so on, and
What
uh,
was your experience there?
oh, it was, I didn't know anything when I went there. I was a kid, I was like 18, 19 years old. And then I was just treated very differently when I went to Arab areas. It felt much more familial and I felt much more excluded in Israeli areas as though although I also did make quite a few good friends, but I met one or two people who had a non-binary perspective on it on the kibbutz, but they kept quite quiet. You have to get off the kibbutz to talk to them about it,
Mm,
um, and then realize that they think the whole thing is just kind of insane and they're stuck in the middle of it. But most people, I just think, are too in the center of it all. They're just afraid. They're
mm,
just really, really afraid and convinced that they had no other option than to fight all the time. Uh, so I think that it's a worship of a mentality as much of as an armored state, and I think it's that terrified child who wants to feel invulnerable, and you feel invulnerable by being as aggressive and macho and militarized and armor plated as you possibly can. You know, you have the biggest defense budget and you have nuclear weapons and everybody does military service and have a machine gun and you just flatten and destroy anyone you feel threatened about by whether or not they are actually a threat to you. You know, you destroy first. It's a toddler. It's an angry toddler. That's basically that meant to, you see the same thing in Donald Trump. I mean, he's like a 5-year-old. It's the same um mentality where you just hit first because you're scared of everyone. You know, it's like the small child at school who has all these problems because they're having problems at home. It's kind of like that, they're seeing a lot of violence at home, so they hit other children because they see everyone else as a threat. It's basically like that, and you can see where it comes from. I mean, we're talking, it's a couple of thousand years of persecution culminating in the Holocaust, so it's very clear where that comes from, and it's almost rational, but not quite. It becomes this belief that in every generation, somebody is going to try to exterminate us, so we must exterminate them first, and that
mm.
everyone is a potential um, genocider. Uh, so it sort of creates that kind of logical extremity, and I think that it's that mentality that people in India are latching onto, that
Mm.
tremendous fear. Um, and that need to be abusive as a form of defense.
And this is a strange sort of paradox where, on one hand, there is the supremacist ideology that we are better than everybody else, our ideology, our way of life, our culture, our food, everything is most, is superior. But on the other hand, there's also tremendous victim complex that we are being run over, we are going to be taken over if we don't exterminate them, if we don't remove them. This is, say, Hindu right wing extreme ideology against Muslims, for instance. So it's this paradox that becomes such a toxic, self fulfilling kind of space in which they're only listening to each other and they only. So this is the thing. This is why I wanted to have you on, because you don't shy away from talking about these things on socials. But I imagine you also get some engagement where people push back on what you're saying, or they send you like angry messages on what is your way? Do you engage? Do you try and talk? Or do you sort of say, I've said my piece and it's up to you what you make of it?
Well, the trolls, I just ignore them. I mean, the first 2 weeks, I was like, what the hell? I mean, I knew they were out there. I'd seen it on Twitter, and I'd read about Modi's kind of army, and that apparently that's the reason why data is cheap in India because it's encouraging all of this, and when it actually started, these kind of waves of abuse and just crazy stuff. I was quite taken aback, and I felt this anxiety for the first couple of weeks. And then I thought, well, you can't go on with this anxiety. So either you you genuinely don't care, or you stop doing this. And then I reached a point where I genuinely didn't care. It was just so predictable and so constant and so much of it that it just, I mean, maybe it affects me a little bit subconsciously, but you can't engage with it. Well, I know when you do engage, they shut up actually a lot of the time. It depends what you say.
One on one, you
Yeah.
know, went one on one. If you had a
Well,
conversation,
if you speak respectfully to them,
oh,
then they tend not to respond.
right,
Uh, or you ask them an intelligent, respectful question, asking for an intelligent answer. Or if they do respond, it's like a tantrum, and they slowly start to allow you to see that pain. And it's almost asking you to reparent them. And I've got into it with a few young men, and that's really, it seems to me, what they're asking for is reparenting, that they're looking for a father. And that's why it's like a teenage tantrum, a lot of it. And
sure.
I'm about the age where I could be their father. So a lot of them,
If
that
you,
screaming is sort of trying to blame me for their pain and so on. And so when I've got into it with them, I've had a few kind of successful encounters. I haven't done it very often because I don't have time. But when I have done that, it's been kind of interesting. They start to become more respectful once they realize you're not going to abuse them. I mean, that's something I would never do. I'm very clear about that. Don't belittle or abuse. They've been belittled and abused enough, and you just make them worse, right? Yeah. So once they realize I'm not going to do that, then they start to respect me. They don't agree with me. They don't shift their position, but they start to respect me, and that's that's good enough. But I do not have time to reparent half of India. But
maybe,
that's what they're, without question, what they're looking for. They're
maybe
looking
that's
for a father
me,
who will treat them with respect.
an army of reparenters who can actually, create these spaces. And the idea comes from also just feeling safe to be able to even bring some of that out and even address some of the deeper underlying fears, as you said. One of the things that you have also spoken quite a bit about is caste. And I imagine that gets people quite riled up as well, because, I'm in Australia, and some of the organizations that I work with here, we do a lot of things around caste discrimination and speaking with government and trying to get it included as a form of racism and all of that. And we frequently come up against, of course, people saying, it's a thing of the past. And by you talking about caste, very strangely, one sort of right-wing-ish conversation that I was involved in, and we were speaking of this, and the gentleman said that, caste is like, it's an English, it's a colonial sort of hangover, and for you to be talking about caste means that you don't know your own history enough and you're not decolonized enough. And that was interesting that now it's sort of being seen in that lens, and it's sort of almost become part of a decolonized project to sort of dismiss caste as anything worthwhile talking about. Do you see in the diaspora, at least, which we both are part of, with generational change and cultural mixing and all of that, do you see caste actually losing its hold? Or do you think this revisionist history that the Hindutva guys are on is going to bring it strongly back into the fore? What's your sense of where caste is right now?
Mm, well, I don't really know. I think there have been improvements, but I think that it's still pretty deeply embedded into
Mm.
most people's psyches. The improvements are mostly legalistic. About that revisionism and saying it's a form of decline. I mean, to me, that falls into the sort of rubbish tip of arguments. There's so much of that, and
There's
and and
so
it's
much
just
of
not.
it.
And you can't. There's no point in. You can state a few facts, but like I said, they've invented their own reality. This fake news is the only way in the internet age to cling to fascist ideology,
No
short of writing
historian, no
more.
historian would take 2 minutes to pay it any sort of serious consideration.
Well, they're serious historian, but there are pseudo historians, and they're growing in number. And the more they can court favor with the king, the more that
Of course,
they'll pay their wares. So it is going to become a sort of form of, it's like creationism or something like that. It's respected and paid for within certain circles. I went to the Grand Canyon and I was given this leaflet about how the Grand Canyon is 300 years old and the universe is 1,000 years old. There are lots of people in America who believe this, right? And and so it's the same kind of a thing. I'm constantly seeing all of this stuff about how ancient Hindus had nuclear weapons, and there's 1,000 continuous years of Muslim rule, and 40,000 Hindu temples were desecrated, and it's just invented. It's just made up. So the same thing as caste was a British invention. That's ridiculous. Or I mean, this is basic history. Or racism is a Western concept. Or it's just a way of twisting the whole decolonial the anti-colonial narrative to make Hindu nationalism appear anti-colonial, whereas in fact the RSS or the British as cousins, and it was collaborative. Hindu nationalism is almost a sort of sub-colonial ideology. There's nothing anti-colonial about it. It's just a sort of pseudo form of grandiosity. There's no substance to it. But yeah, I think if historians continually try to rebut all of these claims, they'll be doing nothing else, right?
I
Just
know.
like if I tried to reply to every comment, I'd be doing nothing else.
I want to ask you, so, I sometimes in Australia, and I hear from our other colleagues across the world that sometimes, of course, the criticism leveled against diaspora who engage with things happening in India is that, well, you don't have lived experience anymore. You're on the outside looking in, and if you care so much, come and live here and live our life and see what it is. And obviously, to me, there is a certain objectivity that comes from also living outside. And you engage deeply with any topic, you can learn about it. You don't have to always only comment when you're in there. And so is the conversation around caste, because even from, for instance, Ambedkarite groups, there is a natural sort of resistance in engaging with people outside the Ambedkarite fold, right? Like, okay, so you're upper caste and you've got an opinion. Let's hear it. There's that sort of. So, what is then your sort of theory of change that you sort of try to use your work and your voice to bring that about? Because the reality is that there are divisions, there are people who hold on to very strong views. As we've said, it's very hard to change people's minds. What is it that you believe? You're doing a lot of this, you're doing a lot of engagement. There must be a reason why you feel compelled to do it. And what is
Well,
it?
just look at the first part first, which is the ad hominem critiques. I don't listen to that. That's just a way of it's trying to make you feel insecure or trying to make you feel unworthy of speaking. And maybe you can sort of if an NRI has a kind of identity crisis or doesn't feel Indian enough, then you can sort of plug that wound and get them to shut up. But then there
Interesting.
are very good books on race that have been written by white people. There are very good analyses of the Mahabharata that are written by I was reading something by a Japanese guy the other day. There are white Americans who've written very, very well on India, French people. I mean, whatever, Everybody has a brain and everybody is capable of thinking and understanding. It's whether what you're saying is valuable and true or not that matters, not who you are. All right.
Yes.
Um, so that's my only response to that. Obviously, I'm drawn towards these subjects because of my Indian background. I probably will be drawn to something else otherwise. And I perhaps get angrier about what's happening in India than I do about any other fascist state in the world, and there are a lot of them.
Yeah.
'Cause it's my own family. Uh, Yeah, if my family background is South Indian Brahmin, and I have a lot of family members who are very into Modi and who kind of have helped to create this problem, and that probably what aggravates me the most is when one of them challenges me on this stuff. Um, that's when I could go into toddler mode if I if I don't watch myself. Um, so yeah, so that's why. But no, I don't worry about the ad hominem attacks. What was the second part of the question then?
What is your theory of change? So what do you kind of think?
Yeah. Well, for me, all change begins in the mind. You know, it's the first line of the Dhammapada where he says, which I've just forgotten, but he says, I think that all that there is begins in the mind. I think that's it, depending on the translation. Um, and I think that our world is just a manifestation of our collective consciousness of where we're at, of our level of spiritual evolution. Um, and in order to tackle these issues, we have to shift consciousness. But that's why I think why the spiritual and the therapeutic and the political and have to work together.
Hmm.
Um, why we need healed activists and why we have to look at fascists and ethno-nationalists as wounded children and look at them with compassion, look at them as a part of our species, a part of our organism, instead of just saying we should eliminate them. That's not going to work. And they're probably a majority now anyway in India. But you can't just eliminate people you don't like. That doesn't work. So that's why I think we have to focus on the therapeutic and spiritual as our base and
I
let
find
that
it very,
create waves.
very hopeful, because I'm in some spiritual circles, which may be Hindu and Buddhist, and some of the thinking around that is that, suffering is arguing with reality. It is what it is, and everything is perfect as it is. It's in the grand scheme of things. And you focus on, awareness, you focus on yourself and all of that, but then also we live in this sort of manifested reality, and then how do you not engage? So I find what you say very hopeful and gentle in a way that you don't have to let go of either. That activist energy that only focuses on results and focuses on action, but can also tie into a spiritual sort of exploration. I think there is space for both. How do politics and spirituality meet in your work? So because you expose yourself to so much, right? And then you say you do it because now you feel strong enough spiritually perhaps to withstand some of that turbulence in the external. How does that continue to meet in your work? Do you continue to have a robust spiritual exploration? Is it more now external? I know you're also with a small child. So how does that play out for you?
Oh, I still meditate as much as I can. I used to meditate for 2 hours a day without fail, and now I do an hour when I have the chance. But I'm always observing breathing and sensation, and I'm always observing my thoughts.
Mm.
I think observation of the ego is the most important thing, and not identifying with the thoughts. So I do that all. When you have a small child, you don't sleep much, and there's all kinds of stress. So you can get angry and lose your temper, or get irritated all the time, and you're just tired all the time. So I do all of these things to try to get through each day, basically. But I've also got almost 20 years of this practice behind me, so that helps, and it's automatic now. I'm always observing sensation, breath, and thought. And
Mm.
I'm aware of what's going on inside me most of the time. It doesn't stop me from having overreactions or getting angry or irritated or anxious, but it brings more awareness to it. Um, and in terms of the Instagram stuff, the reels, the TikTok and whatever, it just means that I can address these issues calmly
Yes.
and not joining the mob in one sense or another. Although the reels that I have some anger behind are the ones that seem to go really viral. Just maybe and I'm not trying to pathologize anger or condemn anger as well. It's still a part of who we are.
Yes.
Uh, but it means that I don't have to get super emotional. I think there's enough of that on the internet. uh, and
Raging,
stuff,
raging and raging and
raging and pitchforked mobs, and there's just enough of that. We need to be able to take a step back and look at it and not be so reactive, even if it's an anti-fascist kind of a reactivity. It just generates an opposite reaction, and then on and on it goes. So that's, I guess, how that helps me. And also to look at the psychological roots of political formations and political movements, and to see it from a spiritual perspective, from as a whole, and not as an enemy, not constantly thinking in terms of the
ah,
good group, bad group, the enemy. Yeah.
you quote your friend Tim Miller, and who says the only thing I know is that I know not. The only thing I am is I am not. What do you know for sure?
By the way, I'm sure he's quoting somebody else, but I cannot find that quote anywhere. So either
He
he's really
did.
radically distorted it or he made it up, but I don't think he did. There might be Socrates. I just can't find. What do I know for sure? I know that I love my son for sure. Um, yeah, and I know that if I move towards that and I keep moving towards love and compassion, something good will come. That's a good way to move. And I think that I'm starting to just what the thing that popped into my mind was don't be afraid of death was what popped into my mind. That somehow I don't know if I'm sure, maybe I am, because that's what came into my mind, but I've begun to feel much more confident that yeah, this life is completely insane, the world is completely insane, on and on it goes, we just sort of kick and scream our way through life, but then when it ends, that's okay.
I know you've been through a bit of grief lately, and you've written about that, like you've spoken about that, losing friends and processing grief. And it's interesting that this came to you now in terms of not to be afraid of death. Maybe it's your mate saying, hang in there, it's all right, it's not going to be terrible. It's
It seems to me that the most important part of what really determines how you live is how you feel about death. And I had certain experiences that really changed the way that I looked at death and made me much less afraid of it and made me see it as restful and beautiful and a kind of a beautiful thing. Um, it doesn't look like that from our point of view, from the point of view of the living, especially as some people have very difficult deaths. But
there. Any of
hmm?
Are you able to share any of these experiences that gave you that perception or that understanding?
Well, one of them was through drinking ayahuasca, and it was like a regression throughout my own life and experiencing life as a baby and then going the other way and becoming older and older and older, becoming an old man and feeling sort of in pain, and then realizing that death was just letting it all go. It's letting the body go, and the body is the source of all of this pain and ego. And once you let that go, then you're free of all that. So what what could go wrong if you're free of ego and free of the body, the physical pain? And if you're free of ego, you're free of the mental pain. So then what could be better than that? And so maybe if I could hold on to that realization, then I can have a sort of more light-hearted, lighter view of life. And I think the question before was about how does that tie into my work? Well, in my writing has got a lot lighter. It used to be darker, and it was always humorous, but the tone of it could be quite dark, and it's become much much lighter. I think because of that. I think because my attitude to life has changed in that respect. And then we forget, and we get weighed down, and everything gets very heavy from time to time with worry and anger and so on. but then we
Two
remember.
steps forward, one step back, three steps forward, two steps back. It's a bit of a dance. You've written about A Course in Miracles as a book that you quite enjoyed. As we wind down this conversation, I'm wondering if you'd like to share thinkers or writers or philosophers or books that have influenced you, that have changed the way that you think about the world.
Well, I guess I have the three really. My main three would be, well, S.N. Goenka, who taught Vipassana and set up his school of Vipassana. His discourses I think about all the time because I've done so many courses, they become, you remember them. And yeah, he's he communicates. So I mean, he's basically communicating what the Buddha said. So maybe the Buddha would be my number one. Um, Probably not the first person to have said that about him. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese monk,
Yeah.
Zen Buddhist monk. I listen to his talks a lot, and read his books a lot. He doesn't ever let me down. Um, just pure love and compassion and wisdom. Really, and very human. He's not like above us or anything. It never feels like that. It always feels like he's one of us. He doesn't look down on people, even though he's probably the wisest person
Yes.
almost alive. He just died, I can think of. And Eckhart Tolle, I found very, very helpful. He's got an unlimited amount of talks on the internet, more than Thich Nhat Hanh probably, although he's got quite a few if you look. YouTube is where most of them are. And yeah, he's been very, very helpful. With Eckhart Tolle, what he helps me with is the attitude to the thoughts and to the mind,
Mm.
uh, and really explaining what the ego is. I think some of the clearest explanations of it have come from him. Um, yeah, I guess those three have really helped, but there's so many others. There's yeah, philosophers. No, I guess it's more spiritual teachers that I can talk about. There's an English monk, English guy became a monk in the Thai forest tradition called Ajahn Brahm. Yeah, he's really great. He's really wise. He makes terrible jokes. Um, and he's in the tradition of Ajahn Chah, who was a more serious teacher, but also tremendously wise Thai forest monk. Ramana Maharshi, Vedanta teacher, he's terrific. He was really and hard. He just goes straight to it. I think that's why people call Vedanta the direct path. He doesn't, yeah, he just doesn't fuck around. He just goes right to the point. Um, so I've learned a lot from him. Yeah, the Course in Miracles. Um, a few people were a bit surprised when I spoke about that. I think it's the object of derision in certain circles, but I don't know. But all the people who seem to deride it have not actually read it. Um, it's a bizarre book. It's been called the New Age Bible by some people, and as I said before, I have certain reservations about the whole New Age movement, but I haven't found anything in the course that didn't feel absolutely authentic to me. And it explains everything, the relationship between different levels of reality
Mm.
and why we can't see where we are. And it's huge. It's like, hundreds of pages long, but there are different ways of approaching it and getting into it. You can also listen to I listen to a lot of this stuff now because I don't have time. When I'm reading, nonfiction for information, or I'm reading fiction. So I listen at night, um, and pretty much every night, and that's been very helpful.
Ajahn Shah and Ajahn Brahm were teachers of my sort of spiritual teacher, Nitya Shanti, who was a forest monk in Thailand as well. So I'm familiar with some of that teaching. And yes, I think it's so relevant and so contemporary as well in so many ways that people can pick it up now and feel that it applies to some of the problems and some of the conflicts that we deal with. So thank you for that. Thank you for all the things that we've spoken about. Rajeev Writer is your handle for Instagram. You're also on TikTok. And well, I don't see you on Facebook. I think the 3 people on Facebook, including my mom. So it's good that you're on Instagram, and I think that's where most people will find you. Thank you for our conversation, and I hope that more people follow you and really open their minds up to some of these issues that people kind of shy away from. So thank you.
Thank you.